Alright folks, we're back on media today, and I'll be talking about why graphics do not necessarily equal quality, and why your stylization is so important, and also kind of how it dictates what your graphics are going to be in quality. We'll be going over a lot of different medias, but we're starting with games and the go-to of game journalists, who are often so bad at facing a challenge that they couldn't beat their own meat if it got hard. And their go-to is always something along the lines of, look at the graphics, aren't they so damn pretty? Well, no shit, it fucking better be pretty. Since your storyline's only going to take about 1 to 2 hours at max length, your guns are going to be pretty much the same basic types and upgrades that they always have for the last 3 games. Add all that together with the fact that the vast majority of all your replayability is going to be in either achievements or the online multiplayer, and I have trouble justifying a $70 price tag on this game. Minecraft is one of the most popular games ever made ever. In fact, it is literally the highest selling game of all time, and its graphics run on a 16x16 texture base. Clearly, there is more to whether or not a game is good or enjoyable than the graphics. Undertale became an incredibly big game because it's a lot of fun and it has a big, complicated story and replayability. Its graphics, however, would be best described as god-awful if you compared them to something else. But that's not really the point of it. The graphics are exactly what they need to be for the game that it is. The game that you're making will dictate whether or not you're going to be using high definition or not, and you don't always have to have the highest, most realistic graphics ever possible. It certainly is good, and if you're intending to charge $60 big box price for it, I do expect it, but I'm not going to call your $60 game good because it's there. And this goes for other forms of media too, and it's where we get into stylization. How you choose to represent your characters depending on the theme and the tone that you want to have in your show, anime, game, whatever, will change how you're going to have to display them. If your game's going to have a lot of moving around and jumping, you need to be able to clearly discern what is and is not what. Especially in some big, fast-paced move-around battle royale like Apex Legends. You'd be hard-pressed to say it has groundbreaking graphical design, but the point is that it has all of the resolution and design that it needs for the style they've chosen. If you add too much detail past here, the whole game would become harder to look at and harder to play. And for a free-to-play game, it's kind of important that the game be as accessible as possible. Not to mention, with the semi-serious design of the characters and more quirky stylization of their individual styles and the weapons, it makes sense that you have more vibrant colors to it with lower detail on them. And this stylization goes on to other things, up to and including Vtubers. And yes, I can do a video without mentioning Vtubers, it just happens to be relevant this time. A lot of people might think 3-dimensional graphic design is superior. Well, that's simply not true. If 3-dimensional graphic design was always superior, then they would always be doing it because the technology has already existed. Even among Vtubers, Tokino Sora, one of the earliest members of Hololive, has a 3-dimensional model and uses them almost exclusively. Started with them, if I'm not mistaken. The 2-dimensional models are considerably cheaper and also allow you to draw in a lot more detail without having to worry about where the light's coming from or how the shading is going to react to the various tips, turns, and rotations that you will get with a 3-dimensional model. So there's no real concern as to whether or not the shading is doing something funny. The shading still moves, but the light source is always coming from about the same perspective, so it doesn't really matter. Basically, in order to make sure that none of the fading or shading or any of the details on the character end up overlapping or looking strange in a particular position, you have to remove those details in order to make a 3D model half the time. Too much detail on a stylized character and you'll end up with some serious problems. Namely, you'll end up high diving into the uncanny valley. And given the fact that the 2D models seem to be doing just as well, if not better, than the 3D models, it's fair to say that it's not actually a requirement for the content they're providing that it be the most advanced and the most heavily detailed character available. Not to mention, with a 2-dimensional or more simplified model, you don't require the CPU equivalent of a Borg mothership in order to run your content. So you don't always need a 3D model. When it comes to media or shows, you can name all kinds of really great shows that have amazing graphics, and it really shows great things when You know, everything's got a high texture detail, everything's moving. You look at movies like Zootopia that had no need for it, but found this amazing middle ground between cartoonish characters and incredibly detailed animation. But when you have something more calming like, say, Mushishi, it has a very simple vibe to it, and it doesn't need an incredibly complicated animation style. In fact, a lot of its beauty comes from what it does with the animation style it has. And you all know where you're going to end up here eventually. Here's a great example of when you should not do higher quality animation. Anyone remember the Sonic movie? It is absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt clear which of the two models is better animation-wise, in that it has more detail. It has a lot more detail. It is clearly something that has a lot of effort put into it to give it much higher texture and overall just be a better, more detailed, and more human-like model. Unfortunately, all this detail means that it plows into the uncanny valley like she brought the condom on prom night. Sonic's design just wasn't supposed to be something that is humanoid in design. It doesn't work like that. He's not cute anymore like that, and it's unnerving to look at like that. The simpler design definitely is lower quality based on, you know, just graphics and detail, but it is the better design for the character they wanted to make. The Binding of Isaac would not have looked good if they tried to make it look like Call of Duty in graphics. And the Borderlands games play out like Looney Tunes had an 18+ corporate dystopian sci-fi baby with a video game company. So the comic book cel-shaded art style works best for them. And while there's a million factors that can go into what design you choose and what stylization you choose for your show, media, or game, or VTuber model, what you need to do is weigh how much can be spent on spectacle or detail, if your style would work with it, or if you need it at all. And when you get into animation, you're going to have to also think about your frame rate. Everyone wants to say, oh, well, the higher the frame rate, the better. Not really. Not only would this increase costs exponentially, but in many animations, those frames simply aren't needed and become cost sinks with absolutely no reward. In simple animation styles, they would also come out uncomfortably smooth. Like, let me see your ID again real quick. I don't want to go to jail smooth. The uncanny valley of animation. The more realistic and the more high detail you make your actual animation, the better it will perform at higher frame rates. And while there's definitely something to say for saving money using lower quality design, you have to understand that sometimes the lower quality design is the better one. There is a reason they literally strained their animation company for the Sonic movie to the point where they actually broke it. The animation company that did the Sonic movie shut down afterwards after they had to go back and redo it all in the simpler style that looked less detailed and less human. But you shouldn't just do that to save money, because there are games that benefit from graphical upgrades. Take the game Doom. The game Doom is an incredibly violent game that's all about spectacle, run and gun styling. But the problem is that it never really had much in the way of storyline. The storyline was never why you played Doom. And while you can still distinguish in higher graphics, the higher graphics also allow you to better appreciate the carnage you are reaping through that game. You should not have the baller soundtrack be the only thing going for that game. It is a spectacle game. It better have some fucking spectacle, because spectacle can add impact to what you're doing. And while none of this has anything to do with story, it's important to note that your stylization and what type of thing that you are making will change how high detail you'll need to be, and how good the graphics are going to need to be in order to properly portray them all. Kind of like how I decided to go with individual PNGs instead of actual animation. Not necessarily because our artist couldn't animate, though that was a factor. But VTubers, like Pikami, yep, still on VTubers, uses a very simple character to better show what kind of content she makes. You get a feel for who she will be as a person hosting her streams by looking at her character, which is a whole thing in the designing of a character, including one of the sexiest two-dimensional character designs ever created. Y'all know who I'm talking about. Possum Reviews. So if you take anything away from this, what you should take away from it is that the Cats movie should have hired furries to do their character design, because there's no way any furry artist would have let those kinds of weird, uncanny valley abominations slither off of his artboard. Like, share, follow, comment, subscribe, and all those things that help me with the algorithm. And let me know, do you have anything to add? Was there anything you disagreed with? Or if you just hate me, feel free to go down to the comments and at least be entertainingly angry.